Okay, so hello and welcome. Today, we're going to react to Potential Histories Germany Could Not Win World War II Part 2. I'm assuming why he's making this Part 2 is because the comment section obliterated and went into fiery savagery. Imagine, this channel, my other channel, I did Hoi 4 videos, and let me tell you, the amount of toxicity around World War II in Germany is amazing. But yeah, so we're going to get into this video. Otherwise, if you'd like to support this channel, my Patreon link's below. Also, the original video is below. Go check it out. Leave a like there, right? All right, so let's get on with this.
Excellent work with the German Missbau. Here's to hoping better sources will be used in the future. However, our intel has picked up reports of continued resistance in the comment sections. Mentions of Dunkirk.
Okay, let's read some of these. Okay. Oh man, this is amazing. Wow. Yeah. No, I get some of these comments too. Just don't attack Russia. It means the Soviet Union. Could Germany have won it if they got England like they wanted to? Oh my god. Man, waited until 1943 to launch Operation Barbarossa. Terrible. They win North Africa. More resources. Couldn't Germany Germanize cities? Couldn't bomb Germany. Romanian oil production would have been enough to sustain Germany with no Barbarossa by the time they declared war on Russia. They would have had Middle East oil. Wow. Wow. That is amazing. Okay, let me break that comment down a little bit. So, let's say Germany doesn't attack the Soviet Union. Fair. Okay? Let's say they focus their attacks on Africa. Britain still destroys the Italians in 41 and encircles a major part of their army and it's just gone. The problem with Africa was that Malta was still a thing and Italy didn't invade Malta, so you'd have to change that, which is actually they could have done relatively easily and taken it in the beginning part, and done it that way, but that's not Germany, so that's not going to happen. So the supplies of oils and tanks coming in is getting sunk by British submarines and airplanes and ships, right? So they didn't have supplies. The main problem with Africa was they had no supplies, and the British did, and they held out long enough until the Americans showed up and pincered them. The Romanian oil production is funny to me because no, Germany was losing oil from the Romanian production was nowhere near enough to supply them. They were getting oil from the Soviet Union. Okay. Also, another thing with the problem with this is let's just hypothetically say they even took the Middle East oil fields, which there wasn't oil like there was today there, okay? It was in Kuwait. There wasn't just oil on this coastline that magically appeared, okay? That became later, after World War II with Saudi Arabia and all of them, okay? They found oil in the desert, but that's after this. Also, the fact that it's 1943 and that America's not in the war, or I'm just gonna leave it there. Yeah.
And who not to invade seem widespread. We will be dropping you directly into the comment section with your primary objective being to root out these myths. Be cautious though. Reports indicate that the Wereaboos will be armed with Cold War era memoirs and David Irving books. Godspeed, Lieutenant.
This is funny. Detailing the incorrect narrative of some guy's YouTube channel, Wasteland. Sometimes the easiest lessons are easy to learn ties. 2 videos to learn a lesson. Wow. This is actually very good. Oh man, I like that. That is funny.
This video is brought to you by Dashlane. Stay secure online and never forget a password again. More on that later. So you may recall around 6 months ago, I made a video about how due to Germany's lacking in the population, industrial, and raw materials sectors, they could not have pulled out a victory in the war they started in 1939. And it sorta got out of hand.
I think...
God, if you remember this god-awful YouTube video, leave a comment below, because I certainly do, and it was a fire.
we should read the comments.
The other day, as I was reading the comment section there, I found that, along with some people agreeing with me, there were a lot of dissenting opinions of yet more ways that people thought the final victory could be achieved, and I am here today to respond to them, and also probably clear up what I meant at the end of the last video talking about limited use of alternative history. Here are a few more ways Germany could not have won World War II. One thing I have seen brought up a few times is that if Hitler had not let the British Expeditionary Force get away at Dunkirk, that later the troops could not be used during Operation Overlord and thus no Western Front, with the implication that the German troops could have been sent east to stop the Soviets. This, however, has two problems. Firstly, the BEF was not simply allowed to leave France as this narrative suggests. In Mein Kampf, Hitler does speak highly of the British at times and suggests that they could be a potential ally.
Yeah, the British at Dunkirk, what happened at Dunkirk is a miracle, okay? Britain had a force in Calais that they sent as a distraction force. Fighting at Dunkirk was not... It's not like Germany was like, oh, man, I'll just let them leave. No. What he'll get to probably is that Germany did try to attack the pocket, eventually, right? After troops had left, and they were having trouble getting through the pocket. But what happened was Goering was like, Luftwaffe will bomb them. And that didn't work, okay? And they lost their momentum for the attack. Now, if they kept their momentum... it could swing either way, right? The British definitely would have gotten some troops out. Probably not as many out, but it still would have been a bloody, costly advance in Dunkirk, right? And again, Germany's backline was very vulnerable at this point. They could have easily been pierced and cut off. But that didn't happen, so...
But this is clearly without a strong grasp of British culture and political policy, and was always discussed with Germany being above Britain and having them be administrators of the Reich, but only if they could shake their, quote, Jewish influence. Furthermore, he realized that Britain was against his intentions in the East and would become a barrier there. All this being said, by the time of the invasion of France, Britain was definitely an enemy, and Hitler was doing them no favors. So then why Dunkirk? Well, this was an operational failing, not a peaceful gesture. On May 15, 1940, the Germans broke through the French 2nd and 9th armies and steamed ahead night and day, thanks in part to some tablet boys.
Okay, yes, the tablet boys. We'll get to the drugs, probably. Now, as you can see, the 17th Army... So, Germany's position right here is very vulnerable, okay? The reason he probably... Again, not getting into it, but the reason the BF got pushed back to Dunkirk and was because... And Germany didn't attack was because they had to reinforce this line. Because this line is very thin, as you can all see. If the 10th and the 17th Army pushed in a concentrated effort and broke through this line, all these guys are encircled. You can see how that could be a problem, okay? So you have to weigh cost-benefit analysis, right? Reinforcing your back line while you are containing the British, right? Because the British aren't going anywhere. While you can contain the French, and then you can secure your back line is a very viable tactic and a very smart one.
Towards the coast. Although these gains were good for the Germans, the mechanized forces were quickly running out of supplies and were leaving their flanks exposed, which opened them to being cut off, the result of which could cause ruin for the German plans. It is at this point a nervous Hitler, being counseled by Generals von Kluge and von Rundstedt, gave a halt order to secure the flanks and allow the exhausted panzer divisions to refit.
And remember, one of the division commanders was Erwin Rommel, okay? But he's under Rundstedt. All those guys are under them. So Rundstedt and the other general were very cautious on their approach to this whole plan, okay? Because this whole plan of going through the Ardennes was a backup. Because the original plan was to do a wave over from the Netherlands into Belgium, which is a massive assault wave. And that was what the British were going to do. But they found the plans, and they're like, shit, we can't do that. So they go through the Ardennes, and after they go through the Ardennes and make a miracle attack and break the French, right? With Erwin Rommel basically saying, yeah, I don't know where I am, but I'm keep going, okay? He's like a General Patton. The high command guys do not like him because he's doing whatever he wants, and the reason they don't like it is because they can't support him if they don't know where he's at, and they can't get reinforcements to him because he's moving too fast, and he's leaving himself dangerously exposed to being encircled. That's why they gave the halt order. They were very cautious, and it's right to be cautious, right? You can't get encircled. It's very bad for you.
Check out this video by Mark Gurges for more. Upon the halt, our favorite drug-addled flyboy Goering promised the Luftwaffe could destroy the British at Dunkirk, and although he failed, I would hardly call the actions of the Luftwaffe just letting the British go. With thousands being killed, over 200 ships being sunk, over 100 planes shot down, and the loss of all the BEF's equipment, Hitler even realized that the halt was an error and resumed the attack while the evacuation was underway, and it was only successful due to the brave French soldiers that held out until it was complete.
That is one thing we completely forget about. The French soldiers that held the line in the outer perimeter for Dunkirk to allow everyone else to escape. They're not remembered pretty much at all, but they're one of the bravest guys. Because not only did they have to let the Allies escape, some French soldiers also did get out, right? Because they were trying to get them out. But let's be honest here. Those French guys holding the perimeter were some of the bravest dudes because they knew that they weren't getting on the boats. If they're on those defensive positions holding out the lines, they're not the troops getting on the boats. So they had to delay the Germans and knew they would be captured or killed, right? And again, he also brings up the fact that the Luftwaffe wasn't letting them escape. Yeah, they weren't letting them just get all their stuff and leave, right? The BEF lost a massive amount of equipment. Because they had all their entire divisions, I think it's a corps that was sent to basically the BEF, the corps that was sent to France, was entirely motorized and mechanized. That was unheard of in 1939 and 1940 for a corps to be like that. Germany didn't have that. Germany had Panzer divisions, but their whole army wasn't motorized and mechanized. That British army was. They were planning for a very offensive, fast-moving war, which is what was happening. But they lost all that equipment at Dunkirk. But they did get the valuable, extremely valuable soldiers back. Okay, those guys that were trained before the war and leading up to it. Those guys you can't get back. So the BEF being saved there is a very crucial point.
But even if he had let them go, there are still more problems asserting that this means a German victory in the war. Britain had to rearm all the soldiers evacuated, which is a huge loss and took some time. This force, when returned to England, was not in any way ready to turn around and invade France, although the troop reserves were good to have if Germany decided to invade. But they were not in fighting condition for a long time. But most importantly, Britain is not the only nation present at D-Day. A combined landing force of American, British, and Canadian forces, along with smaller groups from other countries, landed and fought.
Juno, Sword, Omaha, Utah, and Gold. 5, if I remember. Juno, Sword, Gold, Omaha, Utah. Point Hawk. That's 6. I can't raise my other finger. But, yeah. And the other countries, right? So it was Canada, England, France, the Free French Forces, Poland, United States, right? And even more guys that were volunteering. Belgians, Netherlands guys. All of them participated in some way in that invasion, right? So it's not just Britain that did the attack, right? And even if the BEF still went down, that's a massive loss for Britain. They still had the Americans and everyone else to make up the numbers, would have been, and their own population as well.
Fought on the Western Front. Although the troop loss, if Dunkirk had failed, may have limited Britain's number of troops, the United States, having only mobilized about 9% of its population in the course of the war, could have...
Which is a massive amount when you think about it. It's actually 9 to 10% of our population, which is massive. It's like 10 million men under arms. That's insane to think about.
Very realistically filled in the gaps as it did in reality with the British equipment losses. But all of this still doesn't take into account where the real war is being fought, in the East. The German army will be decidedly on its back foot after Kursk, and the Soviets have massive offensives planned in 1944 regardless of what the Western Allies do. Would the defeat of Germany have taken longer without the Western Front opening? Of course it would. But by 1944, the Soviets have a decisive upper hand and will push the Germans back to Berlin.
Yes, they will. In 1944, even if the Allies do nothing, the Soviets are going to push Germany all the way back to Germany and keep going. They would win the war by themselves. It would have taken longer, but it would have happened.
So to say the war could have been shifted if the British had 300,000 fewer troops ignores the reality of what the Germans were truly up against by 1944.
300,000 troops, though. I don't know if I agree with that. It wouldn't have significantly affected the war, like the outcome of the war, but it would have significantly affected every single operation past Dunkirk. If you lose 300,000 guys, which is what the number he's going with, that is a massive amount of veteran troops that are gone. Okay, you're not going to be able to do Compass and all of your operations in Asia, okay? All of your troops are gone. It's very bad.
This is another one I saw a lot. just don't invade the Soviet Union, or just don't declare war on the United States. And although these comments are puzzling on the surface, as removing a major combatant redefines what the war is and you are now describing how to win a smaller conflict, there are reasons this doesn't work that are all to do with character motivation and why these things were going to happen unless you fundamentally change who the Germans and Hitler were, and then stray into fiction. Let's first start with the Soviet Union. If you read Mein Kampf, don't do it, it's not a very good book, or listen to a lot of Hitler's speeches, both in public and in private, he fixates on this idea of Judeo-Bolshevism, which is a rather outdated term that grew out of the idea of a Jewish conspiracy that had created communism, and the two were the biggest evils facing the Aryan nation. There's a whole rabbit hole to go down here with multiple theorists and their ideas, but I'm not going to go into it here. But that's the basic idea, and Hitler subscribed to it. And the result of this is Hitler's main goal being to destroy the Soviet Union and become the savior of the Aryan people in his eyes, and in the process, wiping out millions of subhuman Slavs and resettle the land with Germans. Hitler saw this as his destiny, meaning he was going to do it at some point, and that this fictitious Hitler that would win World War II by not invading the East is just that, fiction. He ceases becoming the Hitler that we know and that existed, and now we're talking about a made-up story. Now, as to why the Soviet Union was invaded when it was, comes down to two things: resources and, frankly, paranoia. Germany, as I outlined in my previous video on this, spent a lot of the war with fairly limited oil resources, and knew that it couldn't support this attack any later than June of '41, with all the fuel that the battle over Britain was consuming. And even the trade with the Soviet Union would not make up for this deficit. So the High Command felt they had to go in when they did, before the army would not be able to move as they needed to finish the campaign by September, the time in which the High Command figured the Soviet Union would collapse in on itself under the weight of the German attack.
Right, and this all makes sense from their perspective. If you think about the oil, they're like, hey, we can't just sit here and continue to use oil, right? We need to either attack or we gotta call it all off. And then we're gonna call it off, so they had to attack.
And I'll point you to David Stahill again for more information on that. The other aspect was, as I said, paranoia. I've often seen this assertion stated in a different way of, don't break the alliance with the Soviet Union, although I wouldn't even frame the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact as an alliance in the way you think of with the Axis and Allies. The treaty was much more in the vein of, you don't get in our way, we won't get in your way, let's trade some stuff. And it was very uneasy at many points before and during its existence, becoming most volatile during combat between German and Soviet soldiers during the Poland campaign, after the Germans overran the territory that was designated as theirs and moved into territory promised to the Soviets that actually contained oil fields, making it not very subtle what the Germans were trying to do. Both Stalin...
Yes, that okay. It was an alliance. It was a non-aggression pact. Both Stalin and Hitler were going to break this aggression pact, okay? Stalin thought he was going to break it in 1944 and attack Germany, okay? Because that's when he thought his army would be ready, and they probably would have been, right? Everyone thought the war would happen way later in 1944, 1943. Hitler needed to attack them beforehand, right? Because that was his plan. And remember, the Winter War happened after they signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, right? So, Soviets go into Finland, and Germany's like, we want, help them. So, again, it's a non-aggression pact that they were both going to break at some point.
And Hitler knew that some form of war was coming, just not when and who would start it, but going out of their way for the most part to not provoke it. And they didn't trust each other whatsoever. Now, I'm not implying any kind of Suvorov preventative war type thing. The Soviet Union was refitting and probably wouldn't be ready for a large war until at least mid-1942, but with these two ideological...
I will point out that Stalin... he couldn't believe Hitler attacked him during Barbarossa, which slowed down his initiative and all of his guys. He lost a lot of dudes because he didn't do anything. And because he was the leader, and nobody could overrule him. And he just sat there and was like, this isn't happening. So I wouldn't say that he didn't... they don't trust each other. They're both paranoid maniacs. But he didn't think he was stupid enough to do it at that point.
Opposing powers taking territory so quickly right next to each other, it was something that was bound to happen as soon as one of them felt they were in a position to make the first move. By 1941, the Germans felt they were, and they took the opportunity. For more on this, and the German-Soviet clashings in Poland, I'll point you towards Stephen Kotkin's second book in his Stalin series, or this video of him talking about it. The declaration of war on the US is a bit more tricky, especially given that Hitler was aware of the industrial capacity of the nation. However, he saw the US as very internally focused, and figured that it would take them much longer to mobilize than it did. Hitler always planned for war with the United States, as outlined in his second book, written but not published, in 1928, but wanted to put it off until he was ready, often skipping on details about how it would be done. He began to assume that, due to some anti-German sentiments from Roosevelt, the Americans would declare war in 1942, coming to the aid of the Allies like they did in World War I. Piggybacking off the previous statements about the Soviets, he figured he could end the war in the East and turn and fight the West.
I don't know about that. Okay, so... Okay, let's just assume that, because I'm assuming he's planning this before Pearl Harbor, and he had no idea Pearl Harbor was going to happen. The U.S. was not going to declare war on Germany in 1942 if Pearl Harbor didn't happen. Now, Pearl Harbor happening does change it a bit. Now, FDR was very ecstatic when Germany declared war on America. Okay, the reason was because he knew he probably didn't have the support in Congress to actually declare war on Germany, right? I'm not saying America wouldn't get in the war with Germany. We would have, obviously, but it would have been in 43, 44, 45, right? Um, it was kind of a blessing that Germany declared war on the United States. Now, our focus would have been had to have been shifted to Japan if Germany didn't attack us, which would have given them a little bit less pressure. But again, we would still be sending a massive amount of lend-lease to the UK and the Soviets, even if they didn't declare war on us. It's just our main focus would have been on Japan. Probably means Japan would have gone down sooner and then switch over to Germany. But again, that's up in the air.
This feeling ended, though, as the Soviet campaign continued to drag on and 1942 loomed. The German Navy had been asking for war with the United States for some time, as Hitler had been holding them back to not provoke them, knowing that going against the US Navy, the Kriegsmarine would come up lacking. Hitler's solution to this was Japan, which had a large navy that he thought could tie up the Americans until he was done in Russia, then turn westward and save his plan. He constantly reassured the Japanese that Germany would throw in with them if they expanded their territory south into US-held islands. This was among many attempts to get Germany and Japan to fight the same enemy, which also included trying to get Japan to invade the Soviet Union from the east in June. Although Japan kept Hitler in the dark as to when they were going to attack, Hitler was very pleased when they did and immediately lifted all restrictions on his navy to attack US ships, and later declared war a few days later after his foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, said, "A great power does not allow itself to be declared war upon, it declares war on others." Now this decision...
Yeah. Basically, right? He didn't know it was going to happen. It was very good at happened, and then declared war on the United States. As I get referring to my previous point, Pearl Harbor didn't happen. The United States is probably not declaring war on Germany. If Pearl Harbor does happen, U.S. is declaring war on Germany later, but we're still giving them their massive amount of support, so it's not going to change the war.
Decision may have been flawed with the hindsight of putting too much faith in the Japanese Navy and underestimating the US's ability to fight on two fronts and mobilize so quickly, but knowing that Hitler did plan to fight the US way back in the 20s, the timing may be bad given what we know now, but it was not something that he was just not going to do, in the same way he was not going to just opt out of invading the Soviet Union.
I want to hear this one. This is going to be good.
This is the one that I see the most. Take the British out before you turn east. As if it was that simple. The Germans tried this. First by attempting to bomb the British into submission, which didn't work, and second by...
Okay, so let's talk about this bombing. The reason the bombing was very bad was because Germany switched targets instead of bombing airfields, which would have actually very much decimated the RAF. You can even look at their records. They switched to major industrial centers, okay? And that switch gave the RAF enough time to get more planes up and shoot them down and start to even the battlefield out, okay? Now, again, Britain still has the home field advantage. They have their radar all over Britain, and they can see them coming, and they can respond to these aircraft. Now, I'm not saying that it would have been a definite knockout, but just keeping with the original plan of knocking the RAF out by targeting their airfields would have softened the RAF at least a significant amount. I don't know if it would have changed the Battle of Britain. It may very well have. But even then, even if they quote-unquote lose air superiority, that doesn't actually mean they lost air superiority. That means that they have to pick the targets that they're going to intercept at that point because they no longer have the airfields or planes to do it. But they don't lose total air superiority. They still have enough planes to contest it, at least.
Planning the invasion of the British home island in an operation named Sea Lion. This was going to be the amphibious assault that would take Britain out of the war, and plans were drawn up and early preparations were made. But before going through with it, the Germans themselves realized this wasn't going to work and cancelled it. The short answer for why is the Royal Navy and the inability of the Kriegsmarine and Luftwaffe to control the channel. The German Navy would be unable to keep the channel clear of British warships to enable troops and supplies to reach the British coast unless the army's landing was on a very narrow front, resulting in less water needing to be covered. Knowing the coast was going to be heavily defended, the army rejected this plan as they would need a wide landing front so they were not just feeding men into a meat grinder. In short, the Germans did not have the material to carry out a successful landing without it either bogging down and being cut off on the ground or being simply sunk on the way to its destination.
And as I'll refer to my previous video, The Royal Navy strategy for an invasion of their homeland was to send the entire Royal Navy into the English Channel. HMS Nelson, HMS Rodney, King George V, all of them go into the Channel and stop this invasion. At that point, even we're in La La Land now, even if the Germans had the Tirpitz, the Bismarck, the Scharnhorst, the Gneisenau, and all the Panzerschiefs, right, still available, and they didn't get sunk or blown up, and sent them in there, it would still be a killing field, right? Even if the RAF was decimated, they would still send their planes out to harass the landings, okay? And it's such a short amount of coastline that the ships don't have enough maneuverability to dodge out of the way of torpedoes coming in from air or bombs. And again, the Royal Navy has something to say about these landings. And their Navy is well over 3 or 4 times the German Navy size, okay? And again, subs aren't really effective in the English Channel because it's so shallow. Now, off saying all that, even if Germany got ashore, and again with the army, they wanted a wide front to cover to be able to, not be concentrated and killed. For this plan to work, it's in La La Land. You'd have to take them all out in Dunkirk, immediately launch after you killed the RAF, and somehow have this ginormous navy that didn't exist.
In the 70s, the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst wargamed the scenario with conditions favorable to the Germans and came up with the operation being a total failure. Some commenters have gone as far as to suggest using paratroopers to take the British down, but I think you need to only look as far as Crete and Arnhem to see how badly an unsupported airborne operation can go.
Yeah, no, Crete was failure. Bad. There were many reasons why. One of them was the Germans dropped with pistols. Now, because they didn't have a harness to hold the rifles and all their stuff, it came in crates. There's a video on Crete I could do later. But, it did not go well. It did not go well at all. Unsupported airborne troops are not miracle workers.
The Germans would still have to land by sea to resupply them and get relief troops on the ground. And the Royal Navy was too large an obstacle to allow this to happen, even by the Germans' own admission. One particular comment out of all of them really stood out to me. It began with, if the Nazis weren't Nazis, they would have won. And I think this really speaks to the core of my point. Alternative history is fun. It makes for good Hoi 4 games. But when really talking about it seriously, it's really hard to come by any academic conclusions outside of a few days of speculation. Because you begin building assumption on assumption on assumption, and before you know it, you have changed the motivations and decision-making patterns of everybody you're talking about. And you are then just writing fan fiction.
This is your brain. This is your brain on
alternative history.
Would Germany have won World War II if the Nazis weren't in power? Maybe. But it's also equally likely they wouldn't have started the war, or joined the Allies, or anything else. If there's no basis in reality to do with the people you are talking about in your assumption, what's the point? Germany decided to start a war that within a little over 2 years would see them taking on 3 superpowers at once, with the resources of most of the world behind them.
Yeah, look at this map, okay? Allies entering after... Okay, now this map's a little bit weird. Brazil did join. A lot of these countries did join. Turkey, for example, joined in 45. I wouldn't say it was all these countries, but it was pretty much most of them. When you're the Axis, the blue, it's not very good for you to be in.
Add in strategic mistakes and intelligence failures, it paints a very grim picture from the start, regardless of decisions made after the fact. Speaking of intelligence failures, don't let your private information go the way of the German armies. There are plenty of Alan Turings out there looking for information and private data that do not have the same honor and duty to country that the original did. If you're like me, you probably forget and end up reusing your password for the sake of convenience. But when you do that, it's like using the same codebooks over and over, and if one password is cracked, all your accounts could be.
Yeah, imagine Enigma. Imagine.
Including banking information. Then before you know it, all your personal information has been stolen, and your glorious summer offensive is dead on arrival. Being someone who uses the internet for almost everything in life, it feels good to have that extra level of security that Dashlane provides. Dashlane can be...
Alright, so I think it's just an ad for the rest of it. Yeah, it looks like it. So I think I'll end it there. But yeah, basically, very good. I'll tell you, the comment section, man, for World War II, it's amazing and terrible. The amount of the things that they think they can alternate, just change little things about Germany, and it makes it all work is fantasy land, right? They think they can do all that. It's just not going to happen. Germany was not going to win World War II in any way, shape, or form. If you follow any bit of history, it wasn't going to happen. And anyone that says that to the contrary is like in La La Land. You have to changed so many things about Germany as Germany that it's no longer Germany. It's no longer Nazi Germany at that point. But yeah, so if you guys found this video interesting, go ahead, leave a like, leave a comment. The timeout section ought to be very fun for this video. But yeah, other than that, the original video is in the link in the description. And if you'd like to check out my Patreon, it is also down there. It should be on your screen. Otherwise, I will see you people next time.